Okay, chapter 1 is on measurement, and section 1.1 is on imperial measures of length. Now, we are probably more familiar with the metric system of measurement, and that's what you've gone up in school doing in your courses for the most part in math and science. Measurements were given in metric, because that is the system that is used in the world and in the world of science as well. And the system, in this chapter we're going to be dealing mostly with length measures. So the units that we're most familiar with in the metric system of measurement for length would be your kilometer or kilometer, meter, centimeter, and millimeter. However, there is another system of measurement called the imperial system of measurement, and imperial units would be things like feet and inches and yards, and miles as well. Those are the most common ones that are used for length they're the only ones that are used for length in the imperial system of measurement. And even though the metric system is supposedly the worldwide system, there are still some countries, particularly the United States, one of our closest neighbors, that use the imperial system of measurement. And so, to be familiar with that, we're going to learn a little bit about the imperial system of measurement and how it relates to the metric system of measurement. So the first thing we're going to talk about is reference. And reference, not necessarily used for any particular type of measuring, can be used for metric or for imperial, but reference are basically using something as a reference for measurement, that when you don't always have a tape measure or a ruler on hand, if you know that something, you've got an object, or particularly a lot of times people use body parts because they are always on you. You always have your body parts with you. So you will use something like that to kind of help you estimate a measure. For example, some adult males would have a foot size that is the actual length of a foot in imperial measure. For me, my foot is a little bit smaller than a foot in imperial measure. So if I were measuring across the floor and wanted to figure out how many feet wide my floor was, my room was, I would actually walk with a little bit of space between my heel and toe, because I know I've estimated that that's about the length of a foot. For my husband, his foot is exactly a foot long, or not exactly, but pretty close to it. And so he will just go heel to toe right across the room and get an approximate measure of how wide the room is, or how many feet across the room is. For some people, their thumb is used as a measurement, and some people, if you have small fingernails, the actual width across your nail can actually be close to that of a centimeter in metric measure. For me, my thumbnail is a little bit too large across to be a centimeter, but one of my smaller fingers, the nail across is about a centimeter. My thumb, and a lot of other people's as well, the distance from your knuckle to the end of your fingernail, the first knuckle on your thumb to the end of your fingernail, that's usually around the length of what an inch would be in imperial measure. And a hand, a typical adult hand, is about 4 inches wide. So in some of the measurements that we used even in ancient times, for example, horses were measured by the hands. They would, for example, a horse which was 20 hands high would mean it would be 20 times about 4 inches, so about 80 inches high. So these are some common reference here now on the table that are used. And for example, our metric system of measurement for 1 millimeter, that could be referred to the width of a dime, the thickness of a dime. So not the width, the thickness of a dime, or the thickness of a fingernail could be used as a reference for a millimeter. For a centimeter, as I said, some people, the width of their fingernail across, or the width of the black keys on a standard piano. So if you're not really sure what a centimeter is, if you think about these things, that kind of give you an idea. The width of a crayon or the width of a paper clip. There's about all things that can be used as reference for a centimeter. A meter would be the distance from your doorknob to your floor, for the most part, or if you're familiar with volleyball, the width of your volleyball net. That's about a meter. A kilometer is a distance you can walk comfortably in 15 minutes for most people. An inch is about the thickness of a hockey puck, or the length, as I said, from the end of your thumb to the first knuckle on your thumb. A foot is, a lot of people nowadays have their floors in their kitchens and that in bathrooms with ceramic tile, and the ceramic tiles, the larger ones, are about a foot in length and width, the square tiles. I mean, again, obviously you've got different size different size floor tiles, but the standard one that's used, which is the larger one, that's about a foot long and wide. A yard is about the distance from the tip of the nose to the outstretched fingers, which is the average length of a guitar. That could be used as well. And there's not a whole lot of difference between a meter and a yard, a little tiny bit of a difference. So you could, I guess, also almost use the distance from the floor to the doorknob as well, being close to that of a yard. And a mile would be the distance you could comfortably walk in about 20 minutes, because a mile is a little bit longer than a kilometre. All right. So if we're going to use a reference to look at these examples, now we're going to use a referent to estimate each of the following objects. We'd have to decide what referent we're going to use. I mean, you don't have to use the ones that are listed here, but if you have another referent you can use, you can certainly do that. But I think most people will know what a thumb and a hand and a foot and arm span are, so we'll probably stick to those. All right, so the first one says the width of your desk. So if you were going to use a referent to help you measure the width across your desk, I would probably go with either a hand, okay, a hand. Foot would be kind of difficult to, or dangerous to walk across your desk with it, but I guess you could, if you wanted to use your foot, you could take a piece of string that would be about the length of your foot and use that to measure. If in terms of these references, well, when you're kind of deciding which referent to use, a general rule of thumb is to basically pick the referent, the largest referent that you could fit at least one of in that object. So for example, if you were measuring the next one, the length of a $5 bill, that would be a lot smaller than your foot, so you wouldn't use a foot for that, okay? So, because you wouldn't be able to fit a full foot in the length of your $5 bill. All right, so the next one, the length of a $5 bill, I'd probably use my thumb as a reference for that and measure it in inches, or if your fingernail, if you want to measure it in centimeters. The length of a pencil, again, my thumb. The length of your classroom would probably be a foot. So again, there's tons of different answers for that. You don't have to stick to those. You could stick to something else, an object that you know that would be about the width of a unit that you know in measurement would be centimeters or meters or whatever it might be, or feet or inches. Something that measures around the same size as those units in each of those systems of measurement. All right, so the next question asks you to choose the best imperial unit of measure for each. So an inch, and if you know, an inch is about the size, as I said, of your thumb to your end of your fingernail for most people. And again, if you're trying to pick a reference, you might want to first take a measuring tape and measure a few objects to see if you can get something that you can readily have available that could be used to estimate. So if you're in a situation where you need to measure something, you know, okay, I know my thumb is about so many inches or an inch or whatever, and then you can use that. So imperial units of measure would be your inch, your foot, which would be about the size of an adult male foot. Most adult males have larger feet, so think about a size, anyone who wears about a size 12 in shoes would probably have close to a foot length. Yard would be, again, if you want to think of the reference of the doorknob one, that's used for meter, but it's close to that of a yard as well, or the outstretched arm. And the mile, we said, is a distance. Think about the distance you could walk in 20 minutes. As for the metric system of measure, you know the millimeters would be thickness of your dime, centimeters would be probably a small fingernail, small fingernail. A meter would be, again, the width of the distance from the floor to the doorknob, and a kilometre would be the distance you can walk in 15 minutes. So if you keep those things in mind, what do you think would be the best imperial and metric unit for each of these items here now that we're going to measure? So the length of a soccer field, if we were going to measure those, we would probably go with the imperial unit of measure would probably be a yard. and the metric one would probably be a metre. For the distance across the province, we would probably go with miles in imperial and kilometres in metric. The length of a ballpoint pen, I would probably go with inches in imperial and centimetres in metric. The thickness of an iPod, the smallest one you can use in imperial would be inch, so it probably wouldn't be a full inch, obviously, it would be a quarter of an inch or something like that. And again, for the thickness of an iPod, you can probably use millimetres or even centimetres. The height of a cat, I would probably go with inches again for imperial and probably centimetres for metric. The length of your bedroom, I would go with probably a foot, or you could even use a yard. And this is a good example of explaining to you sometimes, even though a yard could fit, like that's the largest unit of measure in imperial measure that could fit in the object being measured, in this case the length of your bedroom, most people would probably measure in feet though, because when you go to the stores which sell flooring, they usually sell it by the foot. When they talk about their prices and that. So again, using those rules about choosing the largest reference that could fit within that space is sometimes practicality kind of overrides that, because if you go with your measurements in yards and everything there is in feet, it'd be better to just as well do it to measure it in feet first. And the second one, the metric unit of measure again for your room would probably be metre. Oops, last. Okay, so the next section here asks you to use your referent for inches and centimetres and estimate the length of the object shown, and then use the rulers to get the actual measure for each object. So the first one, we have a pencil there, and if I were to use my thumb length here to measure this, just looking at the length of my thumb, that would be, if I'm estimating, whoops, I forget to do that all the time. This would be the length of my thumb. I'm just kind of drawing it here along. This would be, oh, I must be touching something, it won't go. Oh, there you go. All right, so that's about the length of the distance from my knuckle to the end of my thumb. So if and I'm not looking at the ruler there now, so if that was my estimate of an inch, and I kind of eyeball that again and say there's another one, and there's another one about that long. I think my middle one's a little bit short. And then I would guess my estimate would be that is about 4 inches, but I'm a little bit off because it's really only about 3.5 inches, looks like. Okay, and I'm actually going to not say inch is, I'm just going to use the abbreviation there. Okay, so, and if I did it in centimetres, so I go back and erase this now and do my estimate in centimetres, my width across my pinky nail is about the size of a centimetre, so that would be, if I just draw something which across the width, I've just got my fingernail here measured up against this, and it's about that wide, so that's about a centimetre. So if I just eyeball those and just try to use my fingernail and go across 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. I'm a little bit over there on a few of them. So when I did that using my referent, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, I came up with 8 centimetres. But when I actually look at the ruler, I'm a little bit off. A few of mine, I got a little bit more space there. It's hard to do this with the iPad because when you touch it, it won't let you mark. So my centimetres are a little bit over. So my estimate was 8 centimetres, but it's actually closer to 9 centimetres. So my estimate was a little bit off there. My reference is not as great. So the next one, if I do the same kind of thing with my thumb for the inches, that's about an inch. It looks like it's about 2 inches. And when I look at the ruler, it's actually about 2, and these are in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. These markings on the inch side are 1/8. So it looks like if I were to line that end up there, it looks like it's about 2 1/8 of an inch. And then if I go to the metric, my metric reference for my centimeter would be my fingernail again, and that would be about right here, 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 here. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, and not quite another one, so 5, probably around 5, yeah. So that would be 5 centimeters. And if I look at the actual measure, it's about 5.5, I think, 5.5 centimeters. All right, so the last question there now asks you to match up the measurement with the most reasonable referent. Or not the last question, the next question. So if we look at the questions there, the matches, we've got a centimeter. So if we look at the list on the right, a centimeter looks to be, if I were to match that up, I would go with J. Thickness of a white eraser. So one of those little square white erasers. A foot would be the length of a typical floor tile, so G. A yard would be, looking at that, probably the typical height of a 4-year-old child, so that would be about the height of a yard, so F. 100 meters, I would probably guess would be the length of a football field. And 2 meters, if you think about 2 meters, if a meter is up to the door now, probably 2 meters would be close to the height of a typical doorway. So that would be I. 8 inches. I will go with the width of a standard sheet of paper, because most paper, you know, is 8.5 by 11, the short paper. So that would be a good reference, I guess, for 8 inches. A millimeter would be the thickness of a dime. And 10 centimeters, looking at the things that we have left, there would probably be close to the length of a chalkboard eraser. 2 inches would probably be the length of an AA battery. And the last thing, 0.1 millimeters, would be about the thickness of a sheet of paper. Okay, so the last question there asks us to use the chart that's provided there to answer questions A and B. And the chart basically shows you the relationship among the different units of measure in imperial system. And the first one that's given there is that a foot is about 12 inches, or is exactly 12 inches, sorry. A yard is 3 feet, or 3 feet if every foot is 12 inches, and that could also be seen as 3 times 12 or 36 inches. And the mile is 1,760 yards, which if every yard is 3 feet, then if you multiply that by 3, you would get 1 mile is also 5,280 feet. So if you were asked to convert 7 yards to feet, you would have, well, every foot is, if you look at the table, every yard, is 3 feet. So 7 yards for I would be 7 times 3, or 21 feet. And question number 2, if you look at the chart for inches, you know that every yard is 36 inches. So if you got 7 yards, you got 7 times 36, which is 252. So I thought, but I wasn't sure. Okay, 252 inches. And the next one there converts 62 inches to feet and inches. I'm just going to move over here for I have a bit of room. So if I have 62 inches, then every 12 inches is a foot. So if I divide that by 12, I got 62 divided by 12, I get 5 and a bit. I get 5 feet, 5 full feet, and 5 times 12 is 60, so there's a remainder of 2 inches left over. Okay, so the last one there wants you to convert. So this is I, and this is part 2. So you have yards, feet, and inches. So if we take 62 inches and convert it to yards, feet, and inches, first we figure out, well, 62 divided by 36, because every 36 inches is 1 full yard. So 62 divided by 36 is 1, only goes into that once, with a remainder of 62 take away 36 is going to be 26 inches. So it's going to be 1 yard and 26 inches left over. But every 12 inches is a foot. So if you look at 26 inches, there are actually 2 full feet that can go into that, because 26 divided by 12 would be 2 times. So that would be 2 full feet, and 2 12s are 24, so that leaves us with a remainder of 2 inches. And that's it for this section, for the examples. So you can try the questions on page 11 in your textbook for practice.